Good afternoon. I'm Thu Pence. It is December the 23rd, 2020, about 3:15 in the afternoon, and this is the 11th in our series of what we've been calling the coronavirus videos. Today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the virus, update you on that, the vaccine, the economy, the election, and then we're going to talk about what I call the so what. What does all this really mean to the economy and markets and people's accounts? So here we are. Now, we talked last time about, summer did not kill the virus. Everything had been built around this big assumption that summer was going to kill the virus. It didn't happen. And so now we have to deal with the fact that that premise didn't work out. And we have to kind of go through what's going on now. But we've learned a whole lot about the virus. We're coming up on 1 year even, pretty quickly. And we've learned a lot about it and how to deal with it. So let's start with this slide, the 7-day average of COVID-19 cases and deaths in the United States. Now, as an economist, I want to tell you, it's all kind of interesting. Oh, by the way, I'm wearing my red vest and everything because it's a happy holiday season. And so Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everybody. But what I want to bring you back to is this slide. And as an economist, I always find it interesting when the data really kind of shows us what's going on in kind of life. So if you look at this slide, look at the blue area, you see that little notch over there on the right? It's pretty pronounced. Well, that's the statistical evidence of Thanksgiving, right? So what happened at Thanksgiving, everybody, they quit doing their testing and they spent time with their families and they kind of all came together. And so you didn't see as many cases reported during the week of Thanksgiving. And then Thanksgiving gets over with and now you see the big upturn because what did we do? We had Thanksgiving with families. We did not social distance and more people got the virus. So it's kind of interesting when you see the data kind of, play this out in real life. Now, also take a look. As the number of cases have gone up, so have deaths, and they've increased. But not at quite the same ratio as we had before. Bottom line, cases in the United States are going up dramatically all across the board. A lot of that's due to, this is the lag after Thanksgiving, and what are we going to have in a couple of days? Christmas. And then after that, New Year's. And is everybody social distancing, and is everybody wearing masks? No. So what's going to happen? More and more cases. That's kind of where we're headed, right? We're headed into the increase. We're over more 225,000. We'll probably hit 250,000 cases a day. Vastly dramatic. But we've learned a lot. Those numbers don't mean quite as much now as they did 200 days ago, when we remember how we looked at it was first coming out in the United States, or you look at the European Union, so you can see where the deaths were higher relative to the total number of cases. Now we can also see that in the United States and also Europe, this thing has come roaring back. Summer did not kill the virus. So as we move into the fall, two things have happened. We're moving into the fall and we're beginning to have holiday season, but more importantly, what we have is COVID fatigue. People are just no longer taking this seriously, so what does it do? It comes back, and if you forget about it, it's going to remind you. Remember, the virus is the virus is the virus. It does whatever it's going to do, and there's not a lot we can do to interfere with that. We just kind of ameliorate it. So now let's look at the big four. We have California, Florida, New York, and Texas. And you can see California has spiked tremendously. Florida has kind of kept things under control, but they're having an increase back to where they are higher positivity rates. New York is beginning to, they've been most draconian in their lockdowns, and now you're beginning to see that pick up. Texas has data that's kind of all over the place. But the important thing, you're seeing a large percentage of the population, the big four, are beginning to see an uptick in cases and positivity rates. And we're seeing that, again, it shows up in death rates as well. There's a lag effect to the increase in cases and the increase in mortality. This is what waves look like. This is United States hospitalizations based on COVID-19. And basically, here's the waves. They come, you get a big peak, then you get a trough, then they come again. Now you can look and see where we are right now. Remember, the real risk that's out there that we have to pay close attention to is the capacity of the healthcare system. Remember 14 days to slow the spread and all of those things. It wasn't about stopping the virus. It was slowing it down long enough that capacity in the healthcare system could help those people that are most acute. And this is the important thing to pay attention to. Again, we know a lot more now than we did before. This is the distribution of cases and death by age in the United States. And here's the deal. If you're young, okay, look at the total number of cases. Most of the people having cases now are young folks. And fewer of the cases are old folks, right? And that you can see it. Now take a look at the death. If you look at that, very few young people are dying by this. But as you get into the older groups, what this basically means is for people over 85 years old, if you get this, there's a high percentage of people for which it creates mortality. So we now know and can read this and begin to understand that if you look at case fatality rate by age group, okay, this really affects those people most in the age groups, in the older age groups. Now, when we take a look here, what's also very important to recognize, I'm going to go back to this slide and just show you here just a second. This case fatality rate is very important. If you're over 85 years old, you got a better than a 20% chance of this being a mortal issue. At younger ages, it's much, much less. And as a matter of fact, I want to give you some perspective on this. And I am not trying to make light of this at all. But as we think about how this affects our economy and everything going forward, it really affects policy and it affects how we do it. So if you remember this chart, you're taking a look at, remember this chart, right? A distribution of age. And I want you to think about the fact, if you're under the age of 30, right? The chances of COVID killing you, okay, is really about the same as you getting killed on a bicycle. Okay, the chances of you dying from COVID is about the same as being on a bicycle. If you're in the ages, more the middle age group, it's about the same as falling. It's less than falling down. Okay, that's an important issue. Now, if you get to the older group around age 60, 64 and above, all right, you're roughly slightly more than the suicide rate. So this is the point that I'm trying to make. The fact is, if you're in that age group, okay, that this doesn't have a lot of mortality, you're going to begin to deal with it differently. Now, the tragedy is, if you're over the age of 85, this thing has a high likelihood in relative terms of affecting you. I mean, it basically is more deadly than heart disease. So this is why our policy of dealing with this originally was protecting everyone from everyone. And now it shifts to protecting those at risk from anyone. So those people over age 85, we really have to protect. Those people at the other end of the spectrum, okay, we really have to kind of look at their risk factor is higher from an economic catastrophe than it is from a healthcare catastrophe. So I want you to really understand that, is that at one end of the spectrum of the age group, they're more affected economically by this virus, where the older folks who are retired, okay, and their effect on the economy, they are more affected from a healthcare standpoint. And this is how policy has to change. Now, what does this mean? If you look at the country, policies are being done regionally, not by age. So this is a little mix match of what's going on. And these are restrictions and mandates, and every state's dealing with it differently. And you have some states that are completely closed in business, or mostly closed in business restrictions and stay-at-home orders, and then others that aren't, right? And it's fairly inconsistent, and you can see on the map where they are. Now, the thing that's important to recognize is, what does this mean going forward? Everybody by this time knows somebody who knows somebody who's been severely affected by this disease. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody, or they have been themselves, right? And this is very serious. The other issue we have to look at, though, is the economic fallout of all of this. And what does all of this mean for our economy and going forward? And these lockdowns, when they write the history of this thing, there's going to be tons of questions about were the lockdowns affected? Did they make it better? Did they make it worse? Did they really change anything? What happened? And now you have these lockdowns occurring in various parts of the nation. And the other thing is, as COVID cases rise, you're going to have reactions to this. Folks, it's going to be kind of an ugly January and February, right? Because what are we going to do? We're going to spend Christmas with our families. People aren't going to socially distance. And you're going to see more and more of this through January and February. But we're also much better equipped to handle it now. And that's the thing that's important. The other thing that we have happening that's very, very different is we have the vaccines. This is a game changer. It's a game changer for a lot of reasons. Because now that there is a vaccine, and you know, most people think they're going to work, there's two big things to know. Do we have enough of it? And the answer to that is yes. The answer to that is yes. If you look at the number of doses that are available from Moderna and Pfizer and those things, we have enough doses to basically immunize whoever we need to and whoever's going to take it. So that's going to be the case. And then you have a lot of people are getting it and have antibodies. So one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to get vaccinated or you're going to get the virus. That's pretty much the way this is going to happen for a large percentage of the population. But what does that mean? Well, that means that somewhere this year, you're going to have probably 150 million people will have gotten the vaccine, and another 50 or 60 million people will have already gotten the disease and have antibodies. And then we're close to herd immunity. That's going to be one of those things that occur later on in the year. And it's a very important thing to recognize, because now that we have a vaccine, the excuse for shutting down the economy has pretty much gone away. It's a matter of time. But the fact that they've been shutting down the economy in various places, now that we have a vaccine, that excuse or that justification is pretty much going away. And we're setting ourselves up for this big tug of war between needing to take care of the people that are massively economically disadvantaged by the shutdown of the economy, who are typically younger people and in service jobs and things like that. And then the older part of our population who are primarily retired already. So the economic effect is not quite so devastating, but the sociological and health effects are. So you're beginning to see this tug of war that's going to be carrying itself out throughout the rest of the year. Now, where do we think about vaccine access? It's kind of spread out throughout the nation. This is where we are right now. This is where the United States is relative to the rest of the world. We have basically 330 million people, and we've got 555 treatments available. So the point of the matter is do we have enough doses? Short answer, yes. The long answer is how quickly do we get those out? That's going to be a little rough, but we think that we can probably get to most of this through the second and third quarter. So you got to remember, combine the people that are getting vaccinated with the people, maybe 250,000 people a day are getting it, right? So they'll be immune for a while. And so we're looking at this situation later on in the year where we stand a pretty good chance somewhere in the back half of next year, of 2021, being able to see some more normalcy going across our economy. This is not a question. This is no longer a question of if. It's just a question of when. So we're in this horse race between stimulus and virus. Let's talk about now the economy. It is a horse race between stimulus and virus. At first, we had, if you've seen me do these videos before, when it all came out and you had the first great big stimulus bill, we had more stimulus than virus, more economic support into the market than we had the virus slowing it down. Now, over time, as Congress debated for months over doing something, we ended up with a case where we're getting down here to the end of the year and we were finding ourselves no longer with more stimulus than virus, but now more virus than stimulus. And now they're coming back. We've got a new COVID relief package. It'll be interesting to see what actually gets passed and how much money of this final agreement is actually helping the people that need it the most. We have models for the thing, direct payments help, focus payments help, PPP helps, all of these things. And we really kind of now have a little bit more knowledge where we can be more specific of where we're sending economic stimulus and economic aid to carry us through while we continue to fight this. And that's important. But we are seeing some, tick up here on the weekly unemployment insurance across all models. And the other thing that these numbers are leave out a little bit is the continuing claims and the subsequent unemployment benefits are there. And there's still a whole lot of people in this country that need assistance, and we can't just ignore that. But the good news is the economy is beginning to come out of this as we get past this raging piece of COVID that we're going to have that is somewhat self-inflicted that we're going to see in January and February. But we think as we get deeper into the year of next year, you're going to see two things happen. Enough people are going to be recovering from the virus or have gotten the vaccine, and then you're going to see a movement of more to a more normal economy. Now, people get very concerned about the debt. Let's talk about that real quick. Interestingly enough, through all of this, interest rates are remarkably low. And we are just racking up a tremendous amount of debt as we get through this battle of COVID, this war with COVID, if you will. And so the key thing to pay attention to, though, is it's cheaper to fight it now than it used to be. So that while we are accumulating a lot of debt, that the interest burden is less than it was, and that's helpful. Now, what does all this mean? As we poured a lot of stimulus on the economy, you can look at total retail sales have gotten back to pre-pandemic levels. That's a pretty good thing. We had a very quick recession, a very quick pull down, and then we've recovered back. And so you really are looking at an economy that is going through a big transformation. You have a group of people, some sectors of the economy, particularly those in the service industries and low-wage earners, that are more dramatically affected by the lockdowns than anybody else. And the lockdowns are purely a function of government policy, right? So as we begin to get past the lockdowns, then hopefully that part of it is able to come back more on its own. Less and less stimulus will be needed. And then we have to see the world is changing in how we do things. If you take a look at the far side of this graph, you can recognize that we have adapted. If you look at retail sales, which, shopping is the American national pastime. So it's what we do more of than anything else. If you look at non-store retail, right, you can see that retail sales that you're doing online with your mobile device and those things have grown dramatically. So not only have we continued to keep that part of the economy going, it's grown tremendously as people have adapted. Right? We are the most adaptive species on the planet, right? And as human beings have adapted to all that goes on, we've adapted how we do things, and that continues to show growth. But what I want to point out here is while we've had tremendous growth in online, we're still only about 16 or 17%. So if you think about long-term as investment themes and ideas, if you think long-term, investing around this phenomena of the change of retail activity, moving from in-store to online, this thing has more legs. It's going to go on for quite a bit longer, just as we continue to go through this. So we're very confident in that part of investing going forward, that online consumer activity is going to continue to rise as we go forward. Now let's talk about the big issue coming up in a few days. We've gone through a presidential election cycle, and then all of a sudden everybody looked around and went, whoops, we've got a Senate election in Georgia that makes the difference between whether we have a divided government, which the market likes. Markets like divided governments, right? Or whether we have a single party government where the Democrats control the White House and the House of Representatives and the Senate, and are able to push through an agenda with impunity. Interestingly enough, the special election in Georgia, this is probably the most significant statewide election since probably the Civil War. We probably haven't seen a statewide election that has been this important to the future of the country since the Civil War. And so you really, and it's a dead heat, right? You've got everyday polls come out, and we know how crazy polls are. Some of them say the Republicans are ahead. Some of them say the Democrats are ahead. In the end, the Republicans, if the Republicans win one of the two seats, then you have a divided government. If the Democrats win both of those seats, then Kamala Harris, she should be installed as vice president. Then she kind of becomes a very important person, because at that moment, she's the tiebreaker for the agendas that can be put past. So, very important to pay close attention. We're paying close attention. We're being cautious. Okay, most surveys, most betting things, most ideas are looking at it. Indeed, for runoff elections in Georgia, the Republicans have won 6 out of 7 in that space. And so that bears some logic and some desire for people to expect the Republicans to win that. But it's still a key date, and we're watching it very careful. So we're being very cautious now between now and January 5th or 6th because the outcome of that election could change tax policy, and it could change valuation. So that's an important issue. If you ended up with divided government, we think that that's a pretty positive thing. If you end up with a completely one-party dominated government, that can create some volatility in the markets. Then we have the election day, and then there's the key issues that everybody's talking about. Stimulus, taxes, the final outcome of the election, and the containment of the virus. These are the things that are out there that we have to look at. So what's the so what? On the virus, it's going to get worse through January and February. Why? Because everybody is going to see their families for Christmas and New Year's. And we saw this play out over Thanksgiving, and you're going to see a further peak. But then the vaccine begins to kick in. The number of cases that we have, the number of people that are surviving, and remember that most of the cases these days are in people that the virus doesn't kill. So we see that they now begin to have some sort of either they have the vaccine or they've had it, right? So you're seeing us move towards herd immunity towards the end of the year. So that's possible. So we have to focus on age groups there. Protect those who are aged and kind of release those that aren't. On the vaccine, we have enough. Now, we're not sure it fully works. We'll only know over time, but the good news is there is enough. So you're either going to get vaccinated or you're going to get the virus. That's pretty much what happens. They talk about some people, we're not going to, what happens if 40 million people don't take the vaccine? Well, okay, they'll probably open up the economy and those people will get the virus. They can take their pick. On the economy, it's a horse race between vaccine and stimulus. Can we get enough people vaccinated so we can open up the economy? Because if we don't do that, we have to pour more stimulus on those people to help those people that need it the most. The more rapidly we open up the economy, the less stimulus we need in the long term. And that is important for long-term economic outlooks. The election, as I've said, Georgia's really important. We've got to see what happens. The markets right now are positioned for divided government. We expect that to be the outcome, but anything can happen. We've already learned that. So here's the deal. We've got to be cautious between now and early January about the election outcome. Now, once that's determined, we can actually take a good hard look at how quickly is the vaccine and stimulus going to move us towards a more open economy. And then we can focus on that and also hospital capacity for those that are most at risk physically. And so we think that as we move through this, as we move into the latter half of next year, what we're going to see is the economy continuing to improve against this backdrop of the success that we're having with dealing with policy going forward, and with stimulus and virus and healthcare and all of those things. The key here is focus. We have to focus economic stimulus on those that need it the most. Those are people typically who are younger, that are working in the service areas. Those are desperately affected by this. And then we have to focus healthcare for the older people that are most at risk, not necessarily economically because most of them are retired, but they're at risk medically because that's who the virus affects the most. So by getting our focus right, we begin to move over and come over these things. So I've talked a little bit about today, talked about the virus, talked about the vaccine, I've talked about the economy and the election, and then also the so what. We feel confident about 2021, but we also have to be very patient and objective as to how we look at these big things happening, some by January the 6th, and others every month as we go along, as more and more things are able to open up. And when do state policymakers kind of recognize that they want to release and open up the local economies a little bit to allow those most at risk economically to work, and then those most at risk from a medical standpoint to be protected. So I hope that this has been instructive and helpful. It is a positive outlook for 2021 against a backdrop of a lot of interesting things happening. We know so much more now than we did 9 months ago, and we continue to move to get through this. So I want to take the opportunity to tell everybody, socially distance, wear a mask, but also most importantly, to the extent you possibly can, have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas, happy holidays to all of you. On the other side of the year, we'll shoot another one of these probably in mid-January to give you a deeper outlook for 2021. We'll know the outcome of the election and can kind of dig into the economic policies that go forward. So, with that, I want to thank you very much for your time. I hope this has been interesting and informative and helpful as we move through this. And again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and thank you from all of us.